If you are thinking about purchasing a turbo trainer or you already own a turbo trainer, then this video is for you. Now, firstly, this video is not sponsored in any way, shape or form. It's going to be the honest truth. I've added timestamps so you can jump to the part of the video that best suits you. And I also like to have the conclusions up front. So let's jump in with some of the most common questions about turbo trainers and smart turbo trainers. Number one, are turbo trainers worth the money? In my opinion, yes, and I'll explain why properly later in the video. Number two, are smart turbo trainers better than standard turbo trainers? In my opinion, they are in a different league. It's not really the same product. It's such a different experience that I would say smart trainers are far, far better. Number three, are turbo trainers good for training? Yes, they are, and we'll look at that a little bit later, but essentially there is no factors that can affect you, wind speed, the environment, etc. So they are really good for training and structured training plans. Number four, does it get boring? Yes, it can get boring, but you have to treat it differently to riding outside in the real world. More on that later on how I keep it engaging and how I don't get bored when cycling indoors on a turbo trainer. Number five, what turbo trainer is best for you to buy? Now that is a very difficult question. I will dive deeper into every little detail in this video and then you can make a decision at the end which one best suits you. So how do turbo trainers work? Now essentially a turbo trainer is a trainer, a device that you put your bike in that allows you to cycle indoors. Now you have different types of turbo trainer. You have smart turbo trainers and you have standard turbo trainers, often referred to as dumb turbo trainers. Standard turbo trainers, you keep your wheel on your bike, your rear wheel, and you just put the whole bike into it and you just ride. Smart turbo trainers have far more features. You take your rear wheel off and it's a direct drive, so you put your bike into the turbo trainer. So those are the two types of turbo trainer. Within those two brackets you have different variations and price points, etc. we'll look at later. Now, as well as being able to ride indoors, you can connect to training platforms such as Zwift or Trainer Road, and this keeps it far more engaging. Now, this interaction between software like Zwift and the turbo trainer for me is what keeps it engaging and keeps me wanting to go back on. Now obviously the biggest benefit of turbo trainers is you can cycle indoors. Now here in the UK and many other climates we have very cold winters, conditions you don't really want to ride in. Now a lot of people buy a turbo trainer simply just to continue their fitness journey or riding indoors through the winter, which is exactly why I bought a standard turbo trainer initially. I've then moved on to a smart turbo trainer. I've done training plans, etc. and it is great if your climate is not good in the winter. So how do you set up a turbo trainer? Now this is actually relatively straightforward. With a standard turbo trainer you're going to put your whole bike into the trainer and then you're going to tighten it in. And this will clamp onto the axle. It will clamp on in some way, shape or form depending on what bike type you have, wheel type, etc, etc. Now once that's in, then you're going to pedal and the resistance is put onto your actual tyre. So you simply put your bike in, take your bike out. However, a smart turbo trainer or direct drive turbo trainer as it's also called is going to have a wheel off solution. So you're going to take the rear wheel out of your bike and there's going to be a cassette on the smart turbo trainer and you're going to put your bike onto that cassette. So you don't have your rear wheel on when you're on the smart turbo trainer. Now I won't go into too much detail. I have a full video on my Wahoo Kicker Core where I go through the setup, the process, everything Zwift from zero to riding. So do go and check that out if you are interested in the complete setup. Now other things you need obviously a flat surface, you need like a screen if you want to go on Zwift or something like that to keep it engaging. You need somewhere where you don't mind making too much noise because the turbo trainers do make a lot of noise. I know most of them are silent, but your drive chain and once you're sprinting out the saddle, trust me, it makes some noise. Now also on the smart turbo trainer you're going to have to install a cassette because you don't want to be taking the cassette from your rear wheel and having to put it on the smart turbo trainer every time. So you want to buy the same cassette that's on your bike. So that's an extra step on the smart turbo trainer, but you only really have to do it once, so it's not too much of an issue. So what metrics can a turbo trainer measure? Now again, this varies between smart and standard turbo trainers. Let's start with the smart turbo trainer. Now they have a power meter built in. Now what that means is it can measure your power output. Your power output is great to train to. It's a very consistent figure. Now when you've got your power output you can work out your FTP, your functional threshold power, which is normally used in most training programs. That will be your base. You can also measure your speed and cadence, etc. So that's all built in. So measuring your power is the real benefit over a standard turbo trainer, which doesn't have a power meter built in or a cadence sensor built in. So if you are using a standard turbo trainer, you'll need a speed sensor and you'll need a cadence sensor to work with platforms like Zwift, or if you want to record it on your GPS. Now, the standard trainer is a cheaper way to do it. Don't get me wrong, standard turbo trainers are far cheaper than smart turbo trainers we'll look at later. Training and racing. Now, I've done a full 12-week training plan on Zwift on my smart turbo trainer, the Wahoo Kicker Core, and it was absolutely brilliant. Now, here is why I think it's so good. Mainly, and the biggest reason, is there are no external factors that are going to affect your performance. When you go for a ride, you have hills, you have different weather conditions, you have different temperatures. Those things are going to affect your heart rate, they're going to affect your performance. When you're on the turbo trainer, it's pretty consistent. So what can happen is you can measure your power, you do an FTP test, you put your power output, your FTP, into Zwift. Then you can use one of Zwift's built-in training programs. You can also get custom workouts if you have a coach, etc., and import them into a training platform like Zwift or Erg Mode, etc. Now, really, you need a smart turbo trainer because you need to measure your power, but maybe you have a power meter on your bike anyway, and if you do, you can then use your power meter, speed and cadence sensors on your bike on a standard turbo trainer to go on Zwift. Now, racing as well. Now, I didn't think that I would race. Now, I've done many races. I've done 30 races in 30 days. I've tried all kinds of challenges. Check out those videos. I've got race videos showing you what it's like to actually race on a smart turbo trainer indoors. And it is fantastic. It brings a competitive edge. Now, if you are moderately competitive, then it gives you motivation to actually push yourself. So if you know you're going to be racing with a couple of friends next week, you know that the extra training you put in is going to actually help you in that race. So one of the hardest things with the turbo trainer is to keep yourself motivated, and racing or pushing yourself or feeling motivated is one of the best ways to do that. When you are using a smart turbo trainer and doing a structured workout, there is a thing called Erg Mode. Now, Erg Mode basically adjusts the resistance on the turbo trainer itself, so you don't have to change your power essentially. So you can be pedaling along at say 200 watts and then you need to go to 250 watts for 2 minutes. The turbo trainer will just add more resistance, so you have to pedal harder. So it forces you to do the power output that it wants you to do for your workout. So you can grind to a halt. So if it went up to 500-600 watts and you couldn't do it, you'll eventually grind to a halt. So it really is a good way to train because it is super structured and it is fixed. Now, the biggest off-put of a turbo trainer is that you are riding indoors. Now, if like me, you love riding outdoors, you found cycling, you love being in the countryside, then riding indoors doesn't really do it for you. I found it hard to kind of see how that would work and see how I'd actually enjoy doing it. For the people that would say, I just like riding outdoors, I totally get it because I was one of those people. However, having had my Wahoo Kicker Core for a year, I'm now one of those people that love riding indoors and outdoors, and you get the best of both worlds. And that is mainly because of the training platforms. It's mainly because it enables me to ride in the winter, and it isn't a bad option whatsoever. I mean, not riding at all in the winter because the weather's really bad is worse than being on the turbo trainer. And when you think of it like that, that's what you should consider. It's never gonna replace a 30, 40, 50 mile ride through the countryside, but it replaces those days in the winter when it's -2 degrees and you don't ride at all. Actually you did ride because you had the turbo trainer. So that's how I see it. Don't compare it to your normal riding. Compare it to the scenarios where you can't ride or you wouldn't ride because of external factors. We can't really talk about turbo trainers without talking about connectivity. Now, with a smart turbo trainer, they have Ant Plus and Bluetooth built in. This will allow you to connect to pretty much everything. In my case, I had an Ant Plus dongle that I plug into my PC or my Mac, so that gives me Ant Plus. If I don't have Bluetooth, for example, then I would just use the Ant Plus. Ant Plus for me gives a good connection as well. It's a bit more consistent than Bluetooth in my opinion. Now, on a standard turbo trainer where you have sensors like speed cadence or a power meter, then Ant Plus is your best bet. And then that way you can connect to Zwift via Ant Plus with the dongle or your GPS, for example. So as a general rule of thumb, Ant Plus for me is a bit better than Bluetooth. Now, one of the first questions I mentioned in this video is, do you get bored when riding indoors on a turbo trainer? Now, the answer to that can be yes. And I've had times where I got bored. But actually what happened was I wasn't doing it right. There was other things I could do to make it more engaging for myself. Now these are: number one, not using a training platform like Zwift or Trainer Road, etc. to actually track and monitor what I'm doing. I would just jump on and just pedal kind of aimlessly. Now, when you're riding through the countryside, that's absolutely lovely. When you're riding indoors, it gets boring pretty quick just looking at the same wall over and over. So don't treat it like a normal ride, treat it differently. Think about how you're going to make it engaging. Are you going to listen to a podcast? Are you going to watch a series, a film, etc.? Are you going to make sure it's an actual training program? Change it up from what you ride outside, because if you end up comparing to those rides you do outside, it's never going to be as good. Now on platforms like Zwift, you can set up meetups. Now I do this frequently. You can set up a meetup, and what you can do in that meetup is you can make sure there's an option to keep everyone together so you can see other people on screen riding. Now when I'm doing these meetups, I also use something like Teams or WhatsApp video call to call the people that I'm actually going to ride with. Once you actually start doing those things, it becomes habitual and it's actually really good. Once I've done that, I was good to go, and now I use it pretty much every week, to be honest, even in the summer. So the $1 million question, or the $1,000 question: what turbo trainer is right for you? Now firstly, you want to decide whether you want a smart turbo trainer or a standard turbo trainer. In my opinion, the smart turbo trainers are far superior. It's almost like a different product. To be honest, having the power meter there just makes all the difference. So I would say go with a smart turbo trainer. So let's say we go with a smart turbo trainer, and don't get me wrong, it's hard to bite the bullet because of the cost, which we'll look at in a minute. But I got mine for my 30th birthday, and I wish I'd bought it before then because I used it so much, and I love it, to be honest. So with a smart turbo trainer, what do we need to look for? Number one, the flywheel size. Now, when you're on the turbo trainer, there's a flywheel that's rotating. Now, this is going to give you your resistance. The size of that flywheel is going to change the feel, and the bigger the flywheel, the more realistic. On the Wahoo Kicker Core, I believe it's 5 kilogram the flywheel, so that's going round. So when it wants to slow you down, it's got that 5 kilogram of momentum. If you go up to like a Tax Neo T2 or the Wahoo Kicker, then they go up in size, I believe. Now with those bigger flywheels, it creates a more realistic feel, especially going up and downhill in Zwift, like in a virtual world. Next up, think about noise. Now smart turbo trainers will say they are silent, but your bike is going to make noise. So if you're planning to do this in your lounge and it's going to annoy everyone in the house, then you might want to reconsider. So depending on how loud your actual bike is in your drive chain will actually depend how loud the turbo trainer is. Stability is another thing, and how stable they are is going to depend basically on the legs and the sort of width and size and overall weight. The heavier, obviously, the more stable. Now in my case, I think the Wahoo Kicker Core is actually fine. I'm 78 kilograms, 5'9", and I've raced and sprinted, and I've not had too many issues, to be honest. On the bigger turbo trainers, I use a Tax Neo T2, and that felt absolutely solid. It did feel more planted, less sort of wobble. Usage is also key if you're planning to race, and look at what ones are best to race. If you're planning just to do casual riding and catch up on Zoom and group meetups, then maybe just the Wahoo Kicker Core is better for you. Cost is another big factor. You've got the Wahoo Kicker Core, which is £600, what's that, $830, $40, all the way up to like the Tax Neo T2 and beyond. So depending on your budget as well, it's going to affect which one you can get. Now, if you have any useful tips with turbo trainers or anything that I missed, do leave them in a comment down below and help everyone out so they can read them. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Drop it a thumbs up if you did, and I will see you in the next one.